So this is Sunny, and today I came across the Battle of Athens, and I thought it's interesting with what's going on with politics and the country. So today I did doing a video for 5 by 5, the Battle of Athens. So I'm going to concentrate on this article. There's two articles about it. The Battle of Athens, when World War II veterans stood up to the corrupt local government in Tennessee. And this was from December 20th, 2017 by Nikola Budnovich. Sorry, kind of butchered that. Okay, the Battle of Athens. In 1946, the small town of Athens, Tennessee became a battleground. A siege was laid on the town jail by a crowd mostly consisting of World War II veterans who decided to take justice into their own hands. As their local politics was plagued by corruption, police brutality, and electoral fraud. The political turmoil had been present before World War II. An influential political figure from Memphis, Edward Hull Boss Crump, appointed Paul Cantrell as the candidate for sheriff in 1936. Cantrell won the election in what became known as the vote grab of 1936. From that point on, a system of fees was introduced in the sheriff's office, which meant the officers were paid per arrest. The system proved to be very dysfunctional. Shady arrests were made, often without substantial evidence, which included numerous fines for drunkenness and fee grabbing from tourists and travelers on a similar pretext. In the period between 1936 and 1946, it is estimated that the fees amounted to more than $300,000. In the meantime, Cantrell ran for state senate, leaving his trusty deputy, Pat Mansfield, in charge. The racket worsened, and the local population became increasingly displeased. And when several investigations by the U.S. Department of Justice failed to make a dent in the lucrative violation of the authority, the situation reached boiling point. During wartime, thousands of men from McMinn County, which includes Athens, had joined the fight against fascism overseas. The shortage of suitable men had led to the employment of law enforcement officers who often included ex-convicts with violent criminal records. As the war ended in 1945, around 3,000 soldiers from McMinn returned home only to find that the corruptive local government was stronger than ever. Apart from the sheriff's office, the corrupted clique controlled by E.H. Crump held the local media, schools, and pretty much all of the government institutions. This picture is the U.S. Navy troop transport USS West Point AP-23 steams past the Statue of Liberty, bound for the New York City docks while transporting troops home from Europe, 11 July 1945. The GIs decided to respond during the 1946 local elections. They formed a nonpartisan political option, stating their candidates. Knox Henry, a decorated veteran of the North African Campaign, was elected by the GI party to run against Cantrell, who was once again running for sheriff, while his former deputy Mansfield was holding the chair. Due to prior scams involved in local elections, the GIs pointed out their slogan, "Your vote will be counted as cast." Also, a precautionary measure was implemented. Another veteran, Bill White, organized a militia to observe the voting process in case Cantrell and Mansfield tried to rig it again. The veteran militia adopted the name Fighting Bunch, and pistols were handed out to around 60 men who joined it. The county election poll opened on August 1st, 1946, and involved some incidents. At one of the polling places in Athens, an elderly African-American farmer called Tom Gillespie was refused permission to cast his vote by Sheriff Mansfield's patrolman, C.M. Windy Wise. Wise used racist slurs, and despite the presence of a protesting GI poll watcher, and denied Gillespie his right to vote. The deputy then hit Gillespie with a brass knuckle. The farmer dropped his ballot and tried to run away. In response, Wise pulled out his gun and shot him in the back. The event sparked a few standoffs between Sheriff Mansfield's deputies and the GI militia. A crowd gathered in protest at the obvious violation of protocol and the clear intention of the administration to rig the election and keep the office despite the will of the people. The final straw was the arrest and brutal beating of Bob Harrell, who was one of the poll watchers. Harrell protested when a girl was brought in by deputies to cast her ballot, despite the fact that she had no poll tax receipt and was not listed in the voter registration. The girl also seemed to be underage. In response to Harrell's protest, he was arrested and the voting process was halted in that polling place. The ballot box, together with the handcuffed GI, was taken to the county jail in the town of Athens. On hearing this, Bill White ordered his men to break into the National Guard armory to steal weapons. After looting the armory, White's fighting bunch prepared for combat. They had 60 Enfield rifles, 2 Thompson submachine guns, and enough ammo to start a minor war in McMinn County. When the polls closed, all ballot boxes were transported to Athens jail. Allegedly, White responded to the situation by saying, quotes, "Boy, they doing something. I'm glad they done that. Now all we got to do is whip on the jail." End quotes. And here's another picture, Tennessee Historical Commission marker in Athens, Tennessee in the southeastern United States. The photo is by Brian Stansberry, CCCBY 3.0. A siege began on the county jail, and Paul Cantrell, Pat Mansfield, and around 50 or more deputies were caught red-handed while counting the votes without the presence of a second party. The GIs occupied the second floor of a bank that was located right across the street from the jail. The high ground gave them a strategic advantage, as they were able to return fire with a barrage anytime someone took a shot at them from the jail. Cantrell and his partners were pinned down, and the GIs knew that the situation had to be resolved quickly before the authorities sent reinforcements and started a potential bloodbath. Some deputies who were outside the jail tried to lift the siege, but without success. A few of the captives within the building ran out the back door, leaving their weapons behind, and White ordered that any escapees should be allowed to pass. But some deputies, together with Cantrell and Mansfield, refused to surrender. Then the militia threw Molotov cocktails at the building but failed to create any substantial damage. At one point, an ambulance arrived. White and his men held their fire, as they expected it was to evacuate the wounded from jail. An immediate ceasefire was in effect, and to everyone's surprise, the ambulance drove off with Cantrell and Mansfield, who had slipped out while leaving their men behind. White's top priority now was to secure the ballot boxes. Rumors of reinforcements were circulating among the GIs, and time was of the essence. Several dynamite sticks were thrown on the jail, each of them causing damage to the buildings and its surroundings. Eventually, the doors were breached, and the rest of the deputies surrendered. In front of the jail, an angry mob gathered, and several of Mansfield's men were badly beaten, including Wise, who had shot Tom Gillespie earlier that day. Riots ensued, causing material damage all over the town, and the mob mainly targeted police cars and deputies' private vehicles. And then this is McMinn County Courthouse in Athens, Tennessee, located in the southeastern United States. This courthouse was built in 1966, and Brian Stansberry is the credit, CC by SA 3.0. In the aftermath of the riots, the votes were finally counted, and the GI Party candidate Knox Henry was elected sheriff of McMinn County. The event initiated a statewide movement against corrupt politicians installed all across Tennessee and related in one way or another to Edward Hull Crump. Even though the GI local government tried to deal with the corruption, the fight eventually got the better of them. In an open letter signed by several members of the party, the disappointment in the system is palpable. We abolished one machine only to replace it with another and more powerful one in the making. In quotes. The GI government collapsed in 1947 and was replaced with a clique similar to the one they had been fighting against. So I just want to say that previous article was taken from War History Online, and this one is from ammo.com. And it's called The Battle of Athens, The Forgotten History of the Tennessee Rebellion Against Local Government. And I don't see an author, but just want to give credit to ammo.com. Okay, so the fight for civil rights in America is not limited to Black Americans, nor is the American Revolution limited to the 1700s. Case in point is the Battle of Athens. This was a pitched physical confrontation lasting 2 days in 1946, but with roots stretching back into the 1930s. It is part of an overall pan-racial resistance to anti-democratic government forms throughout the United States and an oft-forgotten moment in American history. A corrupt politician machine run by E.H. Crump was centered in Memphis but had influence throughout the entire state of Tennessee. This extensive influence was used to alter the election laws and charters of cities and counties to make the electoral process more favorable to Crump and his men. Sheriffs and deputies were paid on a fee system whereby they received more money the more people they incarcerated with predictable results. Travelers and tourists were hit hardest, with buses traveling through Crump-controlled areas pulled over and the entire bus ticketed for drunkenness. This was felt particularly sharply in McMinn County, which was historically Republican. It has been alleged that the basis of Crump's political power was delivering this Republican stronghold to Democrat President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the 1936 election. The Justice Department investigated election fraud there in 1940, 42, and 44, but declined to take action. The poll tax and politicized ballot counting were the most common methods of fraud, as well as the old standby of having dead people cast ballots. The advent of World War II made matters worse. Most of McKinn County's young men were off fighting the war. This meant that the county began scraping the bottom of the barrel when it came to appointing lawmen. Ex-cons were not considered unworthy, and many were hired to help the county meet its needs. Gambling and bootlegging were permitted for those politically connected individuals within the county. And to make matters worse, the machine was firmly in control of the newspapers and school and was the most gainful employment in the county. The GI Nonpartisan League. 2 servicemen on leave in the county were shot by allies of Crump's machine, and servicemen from the county received news of this while still abroad and were anxious to get home and do something about it. One of the servicemen who was interviewed at the time of the Battle of Athens said he was a lot more concerned about what was happening in McMinn County than he was about what was happening overseas. Once the GIs from McMinn County were demobilized, the area was ripe for a confrontation, especially once the fee-grabbing lawmen of the area began rolling the recently discharged GIs for their muster pay. Among their return to the United States, several resolved to retake the county at the ballot box. Fully 10% of the county's electorate was made up of returning GIs. The reform candidates ran on a nonpartisan slate whose primary goals were the democratization and reform of McMinn County and the expulsion of the Crump machine for good. Somewhat amusingly, one of the impetuses for the mini-revolution was the enforcement of laws against public drunkenness, and the GIs were often from hardcore infantry units and were used to being able to have a drink what they wanted when they wanted without being pestered by the authorities. Once the local authorities started shaking down returning GIs at honky-tonks in the area, the die had been cast. The opposition was calling the GI Nonpartisan League, which drafted its slate of candidates based on the demographics of the area. Democratic areas had Democratic candidates, while Republican areas had Republican ones. Thus, it was truly a patriotic and democratic movement, not a partisan one. Local businessmen made large donations to ensure that the campaign was well funded. The League dispelled fears that votes wouldn't be counted with the slogan, "Your vote will be counted as cast." Tensions rose as the machine thugs attacked the returning GIs who organized a self-defense wing of their league. The self-defense elements totaled 30 men, mostly pulled from poor families and from men who had done frontline fighting during the war. Crump's men responded by hiring 200 deputies, many from outside of the county or even out of the state, at a rate of $50 per day, equivalent to nearly $650 per day and $218. There were normally only 15 patrolmen used on election day for the entire district. Tension at the polls. Things came back to a head at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon on August 1st when a patrolman, C.M. Cindy Wise, attempted to prevent an elderly black farmer named Tom Gillespie from casting his ballot. Gillespie and a GI poll watcher objected, and Gillespie was met first with racial slurs and then with a set of brass knuckles to the face. He dropped his ballot and ran away, prompting Wise to shoot him in the back. Wise later became the only man prosecuted for the events of the Battle of Athens, sentenced to 1 or 3 years in prison. The GIs all gathered at a local store they had been using as a headquarters. They contacted the governor, and the Attorney General of Tennessee to request backup for the purpose of ensuring a legal election, but were met with silence. They learned that the Crump machine was dispatching armed guards to all polling stations. It was then that they decided to arm themselves for what was sure to be a violent confrontation. They broke into the local National Guard armory and looted weapons. The sheriff showed up at the polling station where Gillespie had been shot, ordered it to close, and took 2 GI poll watchers hostage. The GIs responded by taking 7 deputies hostage, tying them up and taking them out into the woods and beating them all. All polling stations were closed and ballots were taken to the local jail. It was then that the GIs decided that they needed to decisively take the jail before reinforcements could arrive the next day. Fortunately, having just returned from war, the GIs were well versed in military tactics, while the deputies were not. The GIs laid siege to the prison with a standing order that anyone who tried to flee without their weapon was allowed to leave unmolested. One escapee tried to call in reinforcements from an Allied boss the next county over. His request was refused. Dynamite bombs were lobbed at the prison, more for psychological impact of hitting cars, which then exploded and turned over in the air. Eventually, the jail was breached from the roof using dynamite. The deputies inside surrendered themselves as well as the ballot boxes. After the battle was over by 3:30 in the morning. There were some minor acts of retribution, but overall there was an air of celebration over the area, the likes of which hadn't been seen in ages. Over 40 people in courtroom elected an ad hoc committee to preserve law and order in the area, headed by a Methodist minister. The secretary of the county election commission communicated that he would indeed certify the election in favor of the GI slate. The new sheriff-elect, Knox Henry, was in protective custody in the Sweetwater, Tennessee jail. He had been informed that the Crump machine intended to murder him. The aftermath of the Battle of Athens was sweeping reform. Deputies were now to be paid a salary, and all county salaries were to be capped at $5,000, though the fee basis did continue for another 4 years before finally being phased out. The gambling houses that served to fund the Crump machine alleys in the area were raided and disbanded. This movement spread to other parts of the state as well. Governor Jim McCord countered it by directing the Young Democrats Club to recruit ex-GIs for membership. There was some ambition to start a new national party. However, United States Marine Corps General Evans Carlson urged veterans to work within the existing political parties. The GI regime did not last long. Indeed, many of them felt like they had abolished one machine only to erect another in its place. A common concern at the time was that returning GIs would bring the war home with them, engaging in political violence against the American government. The Battle of Athens did little to dispel their fears. While Tennessee largely returned to business as usual over the next few years, the Battle of Athens has mythologized several times in films, televisions, and books. Every president of the United States from 1953 to 1993 was a World War II veteran. And this was written by Sam Jacobs. There, I can give the author due diligence. And this again was from ammo.com. And I hope you learned something. I did. I had never heard of this before, the Battle of Athens. And so it is interesting given what's going on today. So thanks for listening.